Hello, I'm Dr. Sandal, founder of Atma Clinic. The modern medical system is falling apart. To fix it, we need to change how we think about health, illness, and the practice of medicine. Welcome to the show, Talking Shift, where we discuss radical new perspectives on health, illness, and the practice of medicine. Joining me today, I have our integrative and functional nutritionist, Ashley Combs.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you on. So today we wanted to talk about dairy and milk. And there's a surprising amount of controversy about dairy and how that fits into nutrition, the pros and cons of it. And probably a lot of listeners have heard that there is a difference between varieties of dairy, a 1 dairy, a 2 dairy, raw milk versus pasteurized milk. I would love to just kind of talk with you, since you're the expert on all of things food and holism. What can we teach people about that?
Okay.
What's the pros, what's the cons, and what should people look for?
Okay. So we'll start with pros. So milk products, a balanced food. You know, it's got the protein, it's got the fat, carbohydrates, and it's loaded with calcium. It's loaded with a number of nutrients. It's got vitamin D and magnesium and phosphorus, things that our body needs. But you know, it's also, when I talk to patients, there's a lot of people who are like a little afraid of dairy or have some like moral, some ethical just issues around it, or are just kind of wrapped up in what the internet tells them, you know. So
yeah, that can be a challenge.
It's never something I push, but milk is a beneficial food, drink, item for that helps our bodies. And yeah, there are some downsides, like people who are lactose intolerant, you know, people who can't handle the sugar that is lactose in milk. Okay, that could lead to GI issues or worse. There is sort of a downside. There is saturated fat in it. It has a good amount of saturated fat that can be that can lead to higher cholesterol levels. Big however, though, I don't see those things. I don't see saturated fat and cholesterol as being bad things.
Right. Yeah, I think
they're over-demonized.
Yeah, absolutely. And we live with so much marketing around the practice of cardiology and statins, and people are very, very narrowly focused on the danger of cholesterol causing plaque in the heart that causes heart disease. And that's a whole other topic, but you know, suffice to say that is reasonably challenged nowadays. And saturated fat and cholesterol help us build all sorts of really critical healthy components, such as sex hormones like testosterone, for instance. Very like structural cellular components. It's cholesterol is a very important thing that our body makes and needs. The issue really is when that cholesterol becomes oxidized. Yeah, and that's more of an inflammation issue. That's a technical point that people don't hear about.
Right.
Because it's inflammation rather than the cholesterol that is our primary target. Exactly. Absolutely.
And that's what's going to be causing things like, you know, the effects on our blood vessels and so on. So, yeah.
And if people don't have enough cholesterol and saturated fat, and if they don't go for really nutrition-dense food sources, you know, calories are one thing, the nutrients are another thing. Right. Technically, calories are a nutrient, but it's nothing that anybody in the U.S. is deficient of, or few people. It's not as common a deficit as, let's say, magnesium, or frankly, saturated fat is something that's not uncommonly deficient in individuals. People don't get enough of that sometimes.
Right.
And when we have those really nutrient-dense foods, they allow us to perform at a very high level, whether we're talking physically or mentally. Raw milk is a superfood, specifically, and I say raw milk, and I didn't mean to segue there, but we can. Raw milk maintains a lot more of the nutrient density than pasteurization. And there's arguments for pasteurization, but it's I think quite akin to the argument against saturated fat. Again, there's a lot of concern that if someone doesn't do it the way that we've been told to do it, they're going to get injured. But when we actually go back and look at that, we say, well, hey, this is way more nuanced than people are giving it. It's not just that pasteurization is a good thing. There's a lot of downsides to pasteurization.
There's a lot of downsides. So first I want to say that, commercial milk production was really never meant to produce a clean product. Like pasteurization
That's
is
interesting.
kind of necessary on that industrial extreme level.
Yeah, if anybody's ever seen one of those places, it's like there's little wonder rather that people have ethical concerns about that. It's not clean.
It's not clean. Yeah. And so in that regard, yes, pasteurization is important. However, that's not the only place to get milk, and often really it's not the best place to go for, finding like a local farmer with more like better practices, raising those cows and feeding them the right things.
Right, grass fed rather than grain fed.
Exactly. And so all of those certain details in that cow's life, its feed, it's being pastured and whatever else, all of those things matter and make a very beneficial product in terms of its milk, its tissue, etc.
I think that's an awesome point. The cow is a living creature, and part of our grocery store culture is that we abstract the milk product from the living creature that's created it. But a cow isn't a machine. A cow is a living entity, and they have variable health. Right. And their health will affect the quality of the milk that they put off. Small dairy farmers, for instance, know very well that you can change the flavor of a cow's milk by changing what they eat. Well, it's kind of like, duh, like, oh, if you really think about it, duh. But we're so accustomed to just thinking about grabbing a gallon of milk at the store, and I'm like, well, it's all the same.
Right.
And that is a result of this sort of industrial process that is not a food or health-oriented process. It's a commercial logistics,
money.
Money and ease, right? But we pay a really under-vocalized cost for that, which is you're not getting real food anymore, right? Like it's almost a microcosm for the big question of like, how do we get real food? How do we eat healthy? Like, well, you have to go to your farmer's market and have food that is carefully taken care of, and you have to have an animal that has been happy and nourished and has good relationships, and kind of a no-brainer when we break into it. But I think very rarely we just don't have a culture that does that.
Exactly. A little more simpler.
Yeah.
Knowing, more or less knowing that farmer and yes, the practices that they have in their farming and they're raising their cows. But the closer we can get to, the most raw product, the better. And so that also brings into the conversation things like homogenization. Milk that's homogenized that you will find on any grocer in the dairy aisle will be the cream, the fat is distributed throughout the milk, okay, and that's for a longer shelf life, but that has its own implications,
right?
So what do we look for? If we can find non-homogenized cream rise to the top, it's more beneficial.
Yeah, and it's tempting to think about trying to standardize all these products. It's nice in one sense if every bottle tastes the same as the next. It's nice if they have longer shelf life. But the reality is that all of these interventions have a very real cost. And when we're doing homogenization, the process of homogenization is very aggressive. It's an industrial process. And it's little surprise that it modifies the nutrient content. Same thing with pasteurization. Literally, we put it through an extreme degree of heat. And yeah, that's great, it kills bacteria, but if I take any biologic tissue, I take an apple, and I put it through an extreme degree of heat, it changes. It's not a surprise. And almost always that's a net negative for the nutrition in that because heat degrades proteins. And so you have all of these sorts of wonderful things in raw milk, for instance, B vitamins and glutathione, which are frankly very, very hard to get in the American diet, that are in relatively high degrees in raw milk and essentially non-existent in pasteurized milk. And it's like, wow, that's a really big deal. You know, there are a lot of people who take high amounts of supplementation of these because they don't get it in their diet. Well, why not? Because our principal source has been modified.
Exactly. Essential enzymes.
Yeah.
All the microbes. It even affects the way we absorb the calcium.
Interesting.
So it's, if you can even, and there are products out there that have like a lower pasteurization. You know, if we can get a little closer to just unpasteurized,
that's at least moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think people have worries about raw milk, right? Certainly the government has produced a lot of propaganda around, you know, why that's a bad thing. And we can understand why they're saying those things, but of course there's nuance, right? The government's job is not nuance. Public health is not the process of nuance. It's, you know, how do we keep people from getting deadly diseases? Well, you know, if you have a factory farming organization that doesn't pasteurize their milk, like you said earlier, because the factory farm is so dirty, you're gonna have a lot of serious problems. If you're not having small batches with animals that are cared about, with farmers who are conscientious, you're gonna have problems if you don't pasteurize your milk. And one of the things I think people really don't appreciate is that if you have a small scale farmer who knows what they're doing, there's very minimal risk to infectious disease from that. Never say never. You know, every time I eat an apple, there's a risk something bad could happen. It's possible.
Right.
But when we, again, go into the nuance and we're like, well, all this extra nutrition, and maybe there's going to be some bacteria in there that maybe could cause some illness. Like, okay, well that's a risk-reward equation that I'm pretty comfortable making, particularly because if I drink a glass of milk and it tastes funny, I'm not gonna keep drinking it. Like, well, why does that taste weird? Probably because it has bacteria in it, something went wrong. I'm not gonna take that risk.
Yeah.
Nothing's easy.
Nothing's easy, as much as we want it to be.
There's kind of that complexity, you know, to get really high quality food is work. You have to be engaged. You know, we pick it up off the grocery store and take it home, and it's just not going to be as dense.
Yeah.
So what about this idea, something I've been really interested in recently is the variation between A1 dairy and A2 dairy. Tell me about that.
So A1 and A2, those refer to proteins. Typically, dairy cows, most dairy cows, they actually have both. They have an A1 protein, A2 protein. But there are breeds, specifically Guernsey cows. They have majority of A2, or predominantly A2 protein. And that protein has been found to be more digestible in humans, less inflammatory.
You know, I saw a study recently, and there's a lot of interesting studies coming out about this. So that the beta casein protein, the major protein in cow milk, which can be either A1 or A2 or a mixture, the A1 beta casein protein is inherently inflammatory. It has an inflammatory effect in every single human being, give or take. Whereas the A2 essentially has very, very little of that, if any. And I think there are many, many people who are off dairy because it doesn't make them feel great.
Right.
And the big question is, well, what type of dairy are you drinking? Is it A1? Is it A2? Is it raw? Is it pasteurized? I hate to see people miss out on a wonderfully nutritious, dense food that frankly is pretty easy.
Very
easy. As
easy.
far as like difficulty of getting dense foods, getting raw A2 milk is not that difficult. Certainly here in Kansas, there's a lot of good agricultural laws that allow farmers to engage in sort of person-to-person sale of those sort of things. And a lot of states are like that now. There is so much value in dairy. I hate to see people avoiding because they're going, oh, I'm just lactose intolerant, so I can't tolerate it for one reason or another. It's like, well, have you tried raw A2?
Right.
A lot of times they're like, they tolerate that, great.
Yeah.
I'm like, congratulations.
Yeah.
You have found a wonderful food that is really dense and excellent.
When it comes to, patients that we see and people who are dealing with strong deficiencies and things and different nutrients, and that's often something that's brought up. You know, I think among all the providers is, well, there are some nutrient dense items. Have you tried this or that? And oftentimes, raw milk is something that's like, wait, what? Like what? What? Why? And then the A2 is new. I feel like not new, but new in our sphere of, you know, just people talking about it. And yeah, I think I've now maybe see 2 brands of A2 milk in most stores.
There's really a consciousness coming out.
Yeah.
It's a great shift to see. You know, when we think about health and how we need to shift the healthcare system, the foundation of that ultimately is how people are eating and maintaining their own health and wellness themselves. And food is one of the cornerstones. And if we can shift how we think about the quality of foods, the density of foods, you know, how much magnesium is in your apple, how much glutathione is in your milk. I think a lot of people take expensive supplements, and you know, if you have a proven deficiency, that's a good thing. But ultimately, we'd still rather get that from food, right? There's the old Hippocratic saying that food is medicine, and that's really, really underrated and even understated nowadays. If people can get those high quality foods, they simply, you can repeat testing before and after starting raw A2 milk, and the values change dramatically. And you go, well, geez, are you taking some massive supplement for this? I'm like, oh, I'm just enjoying my milk. It's like, awesome. That's great.
Exactly.
It's exciting. So it's cool to see the consciousness shift on that to the point that it's even on grocery store countertops.
Right. Yeah. And you know, sure, we probably won't see any raw milk at our local grocer, and that's okay. But there is that shift is important, and it's happening. And I love that we are here to kind of help inform people of, you know, even if it's just, you know, letting people know that there are farmers in our area, you know, establish relationships with those people who are making and growing your food. You know, even just that is huge.
The desire to simplify food production strikes me as something that very quickly has diminishing returns. And when we begin to scale into industrial agriculture, there are always these massive corners that get cut. And we end up just not having food that is nutrient dense. And you know, I come across this all the time. People who have diets that sound great on paper. And then when you get into it, you're like, we have all these deficiencies. What is going on with that? Like, you're eating a nice variety of foods, but the raspberries they're eating come from some massive operation. And the raspberries literally didn't have the minerals in the soil to produce the antioxidants that you thought you were getting from your raspberries. And so as soon as we begin to abstract our food culture and outsource that to some mammoth corporation, what we're getting is really thin food. We're not getting that dense, wonderful. And not only does that have health ramifications, massive health ramifications. Like, I just read an interesting study. 98% of Americans have one or more mineral insufficiencies. Holy moly. Wow. We've really kind of come to that layer of deficiency. If people have all these deficiencies, sometimes, for instance, magnesium was the one that 98% of Americans don't get enough of. Magnesium has hundreds of biochemical processes.
Huge.
In the human body.
Yeah.
No wonder people are ill if they literally are missing key ingredients. And this all really is downstream of the fact that we have oversimplified our food culture. Right? Like, why do people have magnesium deficiencies? Well, because we've got these massive factory farming organizations that don't think that replacing magnesium in the soil is important.
Right.
So then we end up, you know, look at America. We go, geez, how much of this is simply downstream from a, I don't want to say lazy, that's too harsh, but a not thought out food culture.
Right.
Right? Like, we've given away too much of that to corporations that really, frankly, aren't health oriented.
Well, yeah, they don't have us in there.
Right.
You know, that's their end goal, their focus really is profit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I'm not anti-capitalist, but the more that we can shift people's consciousness to the fact that that's just a crappy product, well, then we can really, you know, put pressure on these corporations to be like, well, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to go to my local farmer. And if they want to compete, I would love that if a large corporation is like, okay, how do we make raw A2 milk that's high quality? Go for it. I'd love to buy it if you do it properly.
Right,
you know,
right.
like,
yeah.
but yeah, so I love this shift, and I want to see more of this. I want to see people really investing in their food, spending the time, the consciousness. What am I eating? What am I getting from that? How does it taste? All of that investiture in our food literally condensates as health. And I know that maybe sounds flowery, but it's a reality.
Oh, no, yeah.
And the truth is that if I get that raspberry that was grown on the shrimpy soil that didn't have magnesium or whatever, right? The raspberry doesn't taste as good.
Right.
You know, if you buy a raspberry from a small operation who went to the farmer's market and sold you a thing of raspberries, it tastes miles better, right? I think everybody nowadays is like, oh, you know, you buy an orange or raspberries at the grocery store, like 50-50.
Yeah.
Bland and terrible, or like, oh, that's okay. But you buy it from someone who took care of it, and you're like, what is this? I haven't had a raspberry that good in ages. And you're like, yeah, it's literally, you're tasting the nutrition. It's not just magic tasty sauce.
Right, yeah.
it's like, oh, that's magnesium.
Yeah.
That's what that does in a raspberry. It's like,
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ashley, for sharing about dairy and nutrition density. I think that's such a foundational way for people to shift their health. And I love that you're doing this for patients in your nutrition therapy, really bringing a much, much more nuanced view of nutrition to people. And I really advocate, guys, get with someone who knows how to think nuanced about nutrition. And you can do the things yourself for sure, but professionals like Ashley exist to make that lower stress. And man, do we benefit from it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.